Well, hello, horror heads. I'm DreyOfTheDead, and usually about this time I'd be feeding your head, but tonight I wanted to try a little something different. You see, my buddy over at Sledgehammer Horror, Ken Sledge, he's one of the nicest fucking guys I've ever met in my life, he had me on for an interview recently for his show, My First Horror Movie, and we talked a lot about my first horror movie, which happens to be Nightmare on Elm Street, although this is from Dream Warriors, which is my favorite of the Nightmare series, but I felt as though I didn't fully elaborate on the experience that was my first horror movie. So if you haven't already, please go check out that interview over at Sledgehammer Horror, and then come back to this video and listen to me elaborate on exactly how that movie defined my life and how I probably wouldn't be where I am now and like what I like were it not for me watching this movie at such a very young age. Go on. I'll still be here. I'll wait for you. Oh, hi! You're back. I hope you enjoyed that interview. If you haven't already, go check out all the other interviews that Ken Sledge has on Sledgehammer Horror. It's a really great venue to discover new horror creators and artists and YouTubers, and it's just an amazing place. So let's get into it, and let me tell you about my first horror film. When I was just a kid, it's a small thing, when I was a young warthog, I'm about 5 or 6 years old. I'm at my grandparents' house and I'm under their dining room table. And I don't know why I was under their dining room table. I was probably playing with something, but I loved small, little, dark, crevicey nook areas. Like, I loved going to department stores and fitting myself within those circular racks of clothes. Like, that was my idea of heaven. I was just like, oh my God, this is so fucking cool. And I remember my grandpa sitting in the living room on the couch, and I was kind of peeking around him to see whatever he was watching, and it happened to be very bloody, very just like something I had never seen before. It seemed to be very scary. And I distinctly remember the claws, and I remember the explosion of blood as Johnny Depp got sucked into his bed. And those are the two things that I probably paid the most attention to and actually caught. And they were absolutely terrifying to me. Let me preface this with the fact that before all this, before I'd ever seen a horror film, before I'd ever seen anything even remotely scary, I suffered from night terrors growing up at a very, very young age, as early on as I can remember. I would have these very visceral, morbid, bloody, scary dreams that I honestly don't know how a 5-year-old's mind could conjure something like that. I'd never been through anything traumatic. I'd never seen a horror film before. And so it was very interesting that I had seen Freddy, who is essentially just one big night terror walking around. And it felt a little bit like somebody had made my dreams into a movie. Because I would dream a lot of the time about someone climbing out of my television and like chasing me around my house or around the neighborhood. It wasn't far off from Nightmare on Elm Street. I was just like, what was that? What did I just see? I'd never seen anything like that before. I'd never seen a villain as scary as that. I, watched Disney movies. It piqued my curiosity. I was terrified of it, but there was something there. There was something that I couldn't put my finger on that was just like, what was that? I kind of want to see more, but I'm not in any position to see more because I, at the time, was very sensitive to scary things. My sense of reality was a little bit skewed due to all of the dreams that I would have. I was afraid of everything. I was easily intimidated. I was just afraid of the dark. I would run through hallways to get out of the dark. Like, I was afraid of absolutely everything. There was this striking realization that a lot of times the way that I handled my night terrors was to befriend the villain in them. I would try to win them over. I would try to say, hey, don't you want to be friends? I would try to give them food. I would try to chat them up. Or I would try to make them fall in love with me, which was a very interesting solution to come up with at that age for my own survival. And what's funny is that I try to befriend everything. I love animals, I love critters, I love insects, and I've always said that I kind of know how I'm gonna go out in this world, and it's gonna be befriending something that shouldn't be befriended. A lion or something venomous. I'm gonna wanna hug a coyote. Something's gonna happen to where I'm going to try to make something my friend that's going to ultimately kill me one day. And so I went about my life as usual and probably forgot about it for the most part, but it definitely triggered something in me. Something in my head just clicked. And I realized that I didn't need to be afraid of Freddy. I didn't need to be afraid of the boogeyman in general. And I did consider Freddy the boogeyman because he was the scariest thing I could think of. I started to embrace a lot of the things that I feared. And that started mainly with horror movies and creepy villains and slashers and things of that nature. And I thought, you know, why can't we just be friends? Why can't the people that they're killing be the people who are trying to harm me? Why can't Freddy be essentially my dream catcher and protect the gates of my mind from nightmares? I started to think of these villains as my friends and my protectors, and that was a very interesting shift in perspective for a very young child. It's a very interesting path that started from there because I became a teenager and I got really into the goth subculture and really into darkness and bats and death a little bit and just embracing all the things that I was once really afraid of. And then in my early 20s, I was still very afraid of spiders, and I decided I'm gonna join a Facebook group that's run by an arachnologist and educate myself on spiders and overcome this fear, and I did. And now I as well see spiders as protectors. Spiders are eating all of the things that are there to harm you, all of the disease-carrying pests, all of the mosquitoes, all of the roaches, anything that's going to enter your house. They don't want to eat you. Like, they don't want to, they don't get anything out of sucking your blood. They only bite you when they are threatened. So that's a whole other subject I could literally spend an entire video on. It was just a really interesting path that sort of happened because I watched this movie at such a young age and decided at some point in time that I was going to turn everything around. That everything I was afraid of was somehow put in place to protect me, and that I could in some way embrace it and be okay. And yeah, well, everyone still has their fears, and I have mine, and you know, things that I struggle with, anxieties and whatnot. I don't think that I would be as strong or as resilient or as adventurous as I am were it not for me watching Nightmare on Elm Street. It really did impact my life in such a huge way. It really did set off something in me that made it easier to deal with reality and made it easier for me to separate fantasy and reality. But for the most part, I have immersed myself in these weird subgenres like goth and horror, and it's ultimately been so beneficial for me in therapeutic ways. What's really great is that there is a sense of community that is unlike any other. And the reason that I love horror so much is because it's like a family. It's very inclusive. It, you know, doesn't have anything to do with race or gender or status. Like, whoever you are, wherever you are, you can enjoy horror and you can be a part of the horror community as long as you're not, you know, like a fucking racist or something. If you haven't seen a horror film, or if you haven't seen a lot of horror films, we are almost chomping at the bit to like bring you into the fold. We want to show you these things. We want to introduce you to these things. We want to initiate you into all of this. We want you to experience what we are experiencing. Yeah, there are some assholes. There are some snobs. There are people who be like, oh, you thought that was scary? How stupid is that? And usually those people can't tell you actually what scares them, but they're gonna judge you on what scares you. So just don't listen to those people. You know, there's plenty of us. Most of us are actually really, really welcoming and very warm and inviting, and we just want to guide you into horror and how you experience things, the way that we experience things, and give you a rundown of all of our favorite movies And there are so many factions of horror fan that they all overlap in this huge, crazy Venn diagram. You have the actual horror movie fans. You have the haunters who like to scare people at theme parks. You have the paranormal fans who like to go ghost hunting. You have the true crime enthusiasts who don't necessarily even have to be horror fans, but a lot of them, overlap with the paranormal fans or the horror movie fans. And it's just one big, huge, happy family, and there's no reason why anyone should be excluded. Even if you're someone who is absolutely terrified of horror, there are horror movies just for you. Even if you're someone who is not really into gore, there is a whole subgenre of movies for you. So in conclusion, there are two things that I want you to do by the end of the day. One is go subscribe to Sledgehammer Horror and go through his massive library of My First Horror Movie segments and find some horror fans that you like. Whether you're into horror movies or not, there's somebody there that you're really gonna like. And secondly, this week, take it upon yourself to hug a horror fan, obviously with consent, but most of us like hugs, right? So just go hug a horror fan and let them know, Jason loves you. Halloween 2 wasn't shit. And, Midsommar is not going to ruin the horror genre. Just tell them things that they need to hear, because I think we all need a little love and reassurance in this world, and we could all use some hugs and some good horror. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that if you weren't a horror fan before this, that this maybe changes your mind a little bit about the community. We are always welcoming of you. And if you are a horror fan, then hopefully this has inspired you to take someone under your wing and show them the ropes of horror, because I think we all want to share our passion with the world and expand the family. Shout out to Ken Sledge, that guy fucking rocks, and he's just doing the horror community a huge service. He's highlighting these various creators and horror enthusiasts, and I think that's really fucking cool, very uplifting, and just really expanding the family. So I have the utmost respect for him. Please go subscribe to him, and thank you so much for sitting here and listening to me ramble about my experience with horror. I look forward to hearing about your first horror film and what it did for you. Maybe it scared you senseless and you've never watched a horror film again, or maybe it set you off on a path very similar to mine, and I would love to hear either way, honestly. As always, thank you so much for joining me. Be well and stay strange.